Live and in the place to be. Right, talk about Ten Hag, right? We're going to talk about Ten Hag again because Rio Ferdinand, I saw a clip of Rio Ferdinand talking about, well, Simon Jordan pressed him, just came in right at the end of the interview on TalkSport and gave him a little bit of pressure, some respectful pressure, but he said, Ten Hag, 1 more year or not? And he just wanted a yes or no. Rio couldn't give him a yes or no because obviously Rio's a industry man in regards to being an ex-pro, and I always say the most important thing to ex-pros, more than truth and being a good pundit and all these things, is when they see the other old ex-pros to have that respect. And with the current players, that's way more important than any type of kind of 100% true honesty in the media. But he asked him 1 more year or not, and then Rio eventually, when he asked him the second time, yes or no, 1 more year, he said yes. And the reason was in regards to the structure, right? He said no big successful managers ever succeeded without the structure, which is correct. So put two and two together, Jesus Christ. Put 2 and 2 together, and you get Ten Hag needs structure, 1 more year. Completely understand it. The one interesting thing about it, just in terms of how people are framing the narrative at the moment with Ten Hag, is whether he should be allowed to basically see out his contract. So give him this 1 more year. Normally at this stage, after in a 3-year deal, after you coming to the end of the second year, it's discussions about a contract, about a deal. And they say, well, when are you going to sit down and talk about a deal? When are you going to sit down and talk about a deal? That's just not happened at any point with Ten Hag. So that in itself is an issue. Why are we talking about, should he be given this year? Should we give him this year? So the whole framing of the conversation around Ten Hag at the moment should give some clarity as to where he actually stands, because it's one thing listening to all this noise and ex-pros who are always going to be more lenient towards the manager. It's just that's what they're going to do. Doesn't mean that's the best decision for the club. They just have this idealistic kind of approach to giving managers time. But yeah, so I thought it was very interesting that Rio kind of echoed what a lot of people, or a big, maybe half of the fan base, are saying, to give him that year, to let him see what he can do next season. But we're here not to kind of be so obtuse about it, and we're here to actually try and dissect the reasons probably why he shouldn't be given that year. But before we do that, we'll go back to what Rio Ferdinand said in regards to structure, right? So given the structure, Ten Hag can do better, and structure is what all the greatest managers have had, and structure is what is paramount to kind of like progressing in a good methodical way and kind of seeing these incremental steps and then eventually getting to some form of success. The only issue is if you add structure to Ten Hag, of course what he does improves, but what improves? The players that are coming in are of a higher level. That's what happens. So the style of how Manchester United play, is exactly the style and the direction that Ten Hag has gone with this squad has got nothing to do with structure. Now the only caveat on that is that he didn't get De Jong in, so then he went. Then it's this other. The only caveat is yeah, and it's not even a caveat, but just to clarify. When he was pursuing De Jong, we all thought that he got Casemiro in instead of De Jong, right? He is basically saying that what a midfield we would have if we got De Jong in like next to Casemiro. So Ten Hag himself kind of debunked that. Ten Hag's gone down a squad direction, which is the first point, and that squad direction changed in regards to what he saw the Premier League was, what he saw it to be. after 1 or 2 games in the Premier League, Ten Hag's direction of how he kind of set out his team, and then later on down the line, how he signed players, what player profile he signed, that's got nothing to do with structure. So the way that the direction you go down, that's up to you, right? You're steering the ship in regards to what he's seen on the pitch, in regards to the style. How quickly and how efficiently you go down your road that you've chosen, that then has got structural elements to do with it. How quickly you get the standard of play you need to play your style, right? But the player profile and which direction you're going in, those elements are massively to do with yourself and your managerial process. And the direction and the player profile and also the want to have complete control, right? So Ten Hag wanted to have this veto. He wanted to have the structural control. So, like, it's one thing saying, right, because in reality, we have heard now saying, oh, he needs this structure ahead of him. But Ten Hag himself, the parameters that Ten Hag set in his contract where it was for control for him. It wasn't for, right, if I come in, I want a technical director and I want this. Like, the idea was for him to come in and to actually have, like, more of a control than he did have at Ajax. Now, one could say, well, the reason he wanted the control is because he didn't trust the kind of track record of what was there. But he's coming up to the, I don't know, like 2-year mark of Ten Hag being in charge, right? And there's been no kind of like talk or no seeming interest of bringing in people above him to kind of act as that buffer and to kind of like give that knowledge, whether it's recruitment or in other aspects of kind of like managing a club. But yeah, I feel like Ten Hag has kind of like batted that away himself. But just going back onto that point, that structure in itself is the speed of how you go down a certain path. But in terms of the actual direction, especially with kind of like player profile and squad direction, a manager still has a massive part to do with that, especially at a club like Manchester United where that's not set. Now, the point would be against that is that Ten Hag had to have complete control over what was going on, or a massive say in it, in terms of players and bringing in players. Now he's going to have to give up his veto, so he can't have like complete say in whether a player comes in or not. So the elements that he's got wrong in terms of the squad and the direction of the squad, those elements are going to be taken away from him. So then it's going to be just his coaching role and then his role as a communicator. So his role, the things that he's got wrong with the squad direction, those things are going to be taken away from him. But the issue is that he's set his stall out in how he wants to play and the type of player profile that he has basically bought in. So Ten Hag has kind of like gone down a more physical, a more direct approach, being like, obviously we all know this, really high in regards to, well, in most games, really high up, really aggressive, 2 midfield eights, more on the physical side of things, very vertical games. So he set his stall out to play in that style, right? He played it with his whole squad, he's played it with his reserves, he's played it with a mix of both. So that direction's so carved into this squad, to this player profile, to him now at Manchester United. He's so convinced that kind of that Manchester United DNA needs to run through the team, which is that vertical kind of like aggressive play. That I feel like if the new structure want to kind of like tweak that and go into a different direction in terms of player profile and maybe go into a different direction in terms of how they play, and then when you've got people above you from Barcelona, Manchester City and Brighton, they're all teams that play a specific style, almost you'd say the best style of football, right? The highest level anyway. It might not be the most enjoyable for you, but the highest level. So you would think that the change of direction that there's going to be in terms of the squad and the player profile and the style of play, that doesn't match up with how Ten Hag has. It doesn't match up with the route that Ten Hag has taken. There has to be, when there is a big change structurally and there's new owners, the majority of the time they're getting a new manager, right? Now, how do you minimise the chance of that happening? Well, the way you do that is by the new structure having similar kind of understanding of how they want to play football to the current manager, right? And then there's more of a seamless transition. But there's going to be a huge fire sale. So many players are going to leave this club. Even some of the key players may be leaving. So then you kind of like left with this kind of like carcass, and you're going to fill this back in. You're going to try and like build it up back to life with what type of player, what style of football, what type of character, right? There's all these questions. But I feel like Ten Hag, just going back to the point there, squad direction, I feel like instead of balancing out the squad and bringing in players and playing players like Ahmad and giving our team more balance, still finding the importance in possession, understanding that, yes, we can have a style, but there has to be balance still. You have to have different weapons to be able to defeat the Premier League or defeat enough of the Premier League to get into the top 4, to get into the top 3 to win it. And Ten Hag hasn't created enough tools and enough flexibility, and we'll get onto that because of the rigidity, I think, tactically. But we'll get, like, he hasn't built up enough of an arsenal to kind of like have flexibility and put on different options, or the options that he did have to kind of change things up, he's negated and he's not used like Ahmad, and kind of maybe not put enough trust into Sancho and not play him at certain periods, or not play him through parts of not even bad form, but just kind of like maybe a few lackluster performances here and there, not put trust in those technical players. I mean, you don't put trust in those technical players and you kind of shun them out, like your Erikssons and your Ahmads and your Sanchos. Like, when you don't play these players then and you look for physicality and basically speed and how much ground you can cover, then your team is going to start looking a certain way. And I feel like in the summer, obviously, where he did bring in the Højlunds and then started playing Garnacho all the time from the beginning, not playing Ahmad whatsoever, playing Scott McTominay a lot more, going with Bruno and Scott McTominay, and kind of really showing what kind of game you want to play. And it's quite brute force, but it's not effective brute force, so it just ends up looking clumsy and clunky and really low level. So yeah, I think in terms of squad direction, I don't think it has been good. The last part there, if you compare the transfer market from the season just gone or the summer just gone to the first summer, Jesus Christ, you bought in Eriksson, Antony, Martinez. They're like, and they're the outfield players that you bought. There's like literally, like, in terms of stature and physicality and even like straight line speed and getting up and down vertically, like that's not what you bought, right? Ten Hag bought these players to he thought, I think, in his head, to complement the rest of the players, to get them to play good football and to play in that kind of like traditional Ajax style. I really do think that's what he wanted in his head. And then I think he realised some of the key players that we have to play can't play in this good football system. Like Rashford can't play in that system. Bruno, they're two stalwarts, is that the word? I think that's the word. But yeah, doing the two guys that everyone that bought in the numbers as such, and the fan favourites and the kind of marketing favourites, they have to play. So then Ten Hag completely switched up and then went, right, we're going to go more physical and more kind of like try and dominate physically, because you can't switch up a whole squad. So the difference between the first summer and the second summer is massive. So I feel like after a first year of kind of like mild success, and then figuring out a style where we are more direct, where we are more kind of vertical, and we are more aggressive to a certain extent, then he doubled down on that and brought in more of that type of player, right? Then it went to like 6'4" type players, big dudes. To even Mount, where it's more off the ball, physical, right? In terms of his off the ball work, that's that in that type of physical nature. So the squad, instead of being balancing it out and playing your AMADs and going, right, we've got this physicality, but we need more technical ability to unlock teams, to be able to keep possession better, right? So we need to balance this out. So instead of balancing out, he added to it, and then now we get this kind of like ugly brute force, no ability to really hold the ball. And then, I feel like he's failed on that front. And then probably one of the biggest things in terms of his press conferences and his charisma, which kind of like I'm going to just put together, because what we see as fans realistically on a communication level from the club in general is through the manager, right? The manager is the mouthpiece of the club. And his kind of relationship with the media, with the fans, even with his own players, with his opposition, that all comes from press conferences and interviews after games. So these seem like kind of like tiny little things that aren't really that important as such, but they're huge. They're massive. Like Frank Lampard's got jobs off press conferences. And I think Ten Hag, the one thing what Simon Jordan said in regards to Ten Hag and the suit being too big for him, the one thing there's a lot of things probably that now could ring true with that statement, but the biggest thing is through the press conferences. And I feel like his communication as a human being, forget that he's Dutch and it's his second language, right? That definitely is a thing that comes into it. But his communication skills as just a human being and the energy that you feel from him, and it feels kind of like awkward when he's trying to be like happy and jovial and nice, and even if for him it's not awkward and it's completely natural for him, and even for his friends and family, they're like, what, that's him being naturally funny and da-da-da. It's awkward. Like, he's got awkward characteristics where he when he's trying to be funny, it's like an old weird uncle, even though he's not that old. Do you know what I mean? He's a similar age to Pep. But listening to Pep, it's just like you can just be jamming, having a coffee at some little spot and just be chatting away to him and not even think about it, right? Like someone just kind of like middle age, normal geezer just getting about with his life. Cultured, normal guy, do you know what I mean? Whereas with Ten Hag, it's awkward. So the only thing with Ten Hag, that with his personality and characteristics, the only way for someone like that to get away with it is to be the mad professor that's like insane, tactical, like genius, that's just like moving the pieces and everything's working. And then you can come into the press conference and have that kind of demeanour and it'd be okay. But with Ten Hag, and like, he doesn't have that. That's not what's transpired. And I feel like his communication skills and his charisma are just not there. And I feel like for a big club like Manchester United, one of the prestige clubs, right? Madrid, Barcelona, Man U, Bayern Munich, and probably now because of Klopp. Only for now, Liverpool. But they can easily drop out of it if they do what they did before Klopp, right? But those four clubs, Man United, Barcelona, Bayern, and Real Madrid, it's the way and that's why Carlo Ancelotti's done so well at these clubs, is because there's a certain demeanour that you have to have and a certain kind of air of that it's not as big of a deal as everyone's making out, right? And that's why Carlo's personality works so well at these big clubs, because when everyone's losing their shit and like there's so much noise everywhere, he's the calmest man in the room all the time, constantly. And that, I think, like driven Ancelotti through to a lot of jobs I always thought he was just like a high-end kind of like escort. You know what I mean? Like all the rich dudes are just getting him in when they want something, just sorting for a little while. But that's one of the biggest things that Ten Hag will never have, right? That's like you as a human being. That's why Graham Potter can never manage a big club again. He just doesn't have it. The charisma's not there. You have to have that. And that charisma goes through, again, to the fans, to the media, and to your players. It's huge. The way you defend your team and the way you approach problems when they're obviously bound to happen, and there's pressure being put on you, your team, the club. Like, you stand up and your charisma drives you through, do you know what I mean? And your calmness and your kind of likability in life can see you through a lot of things. And this is still just life, right? And it's still a guy on a job, and I know it's public, but say if this was just a private matter going on in a company, your charisma and your likability can see you through a lot of bad times and a lot of bad results, and get you out of bad scenarios. It really can. You see the difference, and I know there's big differences in terms of like expectation, but even with Ange, it's not as toxic. I know now fans are turning on him, but it's not as toxic because his ability to deal with kind of what's going on in front of him. He might not be doing things exactly how a lot of Tottenham fans want, but there's like elements of him in his press conferences where he can diffuse scenarios, or he can, in good times, be that kind of rock. Like when things were going good, everyone was buzzing off Ange in these press conferences, right? And for good reason, because he was saying with a good performance, the manager can like really like hit home that performance to the fans, to the opposition fans, even to the media, and you're like, wow, he can make it more powerful. You can also diffuse a defeat and make it basically like it doesn't matter, right, to a certain extent. Or you can frame something. There's a lot of things that I feel like also, like with the squad direction, I feel like in regards to press conferences and these communication methods in general, I don't think have been great. And this is the thing: all these points can be like, oh well, look, you can find excuses for him, you can find excuses for Ten Hag in like every stage here, right? In pretty much every scenario and every scenario that he's had to face, you can find a thing where you go, look, it's not his fault. But that's not when you're looking at elite level performance, you're not trying to find things to excuse somebody of performance. You're just trying to look at the performance and go, right, what are the reasons maybe why they're not working, But you're not you're not like, right, let's try and find something so we can be fair. You're not trying to find something. You're just looking across the board and evaluating it for what it is. And I feel like a lot of fans, Man United fans, are just used. We just want to give people a more chance. And it's not fair. It's not about being fair. It really isn't. It's about making the right decision over and over and over again. Correct decision, correct decision, correct decision. And then you eventually get somewhere that's worthwhile being. But yeah. So I feel like the charisma element is a massive a flaw of his. That's something that he's not going to be able to change. And when you're at Ajax, it's different. So when he was at Ajax is a football university, right? So you're like a lecturer there. So there's respect because of where you are. It's almost like you're part of, like, the manager is part of the Ajax system. So even though Ten Hag wasn't a lifetime Ajax manager, you're kind of like embedded in the kind of respect of Ajax as a whole, especially when they're mainly Dutch kids, Moroccan kids that have grown up in Holland, or African kids that have come over who have been in the Ajax system over there. Like, there's just a level of respect for the whole environment. So your charisma value, almost in a way, is a hindrance if you did have that. Like, Ajax, you almost don't want that because you're part of the system. So those flaws weren't there. And also, going back to the language thing, of course there's a language barrier. I get that. Dutch people all have said in the media that he also isn't a good communicator in Dutch. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so in regards to the language barrier thing, I feel like you can just tell his character, personable characteristics or any type of like personal traits, you can see it doesn't matter what the language is. You can tell when somebody isn't when somebody's awkward, and when somebody kind of like isn't someone that is going to be so easy to get along with or so easy to kind of communicate with off the bat. And I feel like, yeah, his charisma will definitely come into point 5 where you'll see, yeah, flaws, because I feel like charisma, people with true charisma can kind of, there's other byproducts of that, yeah, that come along with it. And I feel like a lot of leaders have that, right? But yeah, we'll get on to that. And I think probably the biggest point that Ten Hag has, I just wanted to do that. The biggest point that Ten Hag has kind of like constantly harped on about, even though at the beginning when he was getting injuries, Ten Hag was kind of like, I'm not talking about injuries. And it's funny when people say that, they bring up the excuse but say they're not using the excuse, but they're still letting you know that the excuse is there, so hence they're making the excuse. If you don't want to make the excuse, you never talk about it. That's basically the only way to not use the excuse. But yeah, so we have had bad injuries, right? And the idea is then, so if you're trying to evaluate it as Ineos, you go, right, you've had bad injuries, Eric, so I understand that you're not going to win the league, right? But you're not even in Europe at all. Okay, so you're not in Europe whatsoever. Okay, bit of an issue. So you've probably done worse than what you should have done, even though you've had all these injuries. And then so then we can identify that there's a lower level than what should have been achieved, even though because of the injuries have happened, right? Because you should at least be in Europe, right? I think we can all agree with that. Like conference, right? You can't finish below like 7th or 8th and then blame the injuries for that 7th or 8th position. You can blame the injuries maybe for not getting to the Champions League because they were so bad, or you can blame the, do you know what I mean? But not for everything. Okay, but even if you do want to do that, let's see how you reacted to the injuries, because that's another important issue. Because if we're going to have injuries again. There's a Euros, and then we're going straight back into another season. So there's, again, no break, right? And at the moment, we're playing this really aggressive vertical style, and we're playing the same team virtually in all 4 competitions. So this could probably happen again. So let's see how you've dealt with the injuries. Ten Hag has decided to just to play the same system and just put in more mediocre players into the system, right? Now, if that was a possession-based system where it's about keeping the ball and we've got this, I'm not like De Zerbi kind of how he does it. I have more leeway for good football and not wanting to go away from good football. But Ten Hag is not wanting to move away from this hybrid thing where kind of high press or high positioning, but not really high press. Because we're not really pressing high. We're just positioning high. Big, huge gap, and then like a mid block with the defence, and a real kind of like disconnecting between the two. And he's just wanting to stick with that. So when Ten Hag has seen these issues that have arose, but these issues are there with the full team, right? So he's trying to mask the fact that the injuries have caused all of the issues, but they haven't, right? And I feel like he's tried to, and that's bad leadership. He's trying to stay on the fact that this is just all injury based, like everything, and he just alludes to that. He doesn't want to talk about any issues that he may have had, any mistakes or things that have gone wrong with him. He just doesn't want to acknowledge any wrongdoing, and like we're going to see, he doesn't want to take any accountability. So instead of trying to play Ahmad maybe like we see, and play Amrabat and try and kind of like hold possession a little bit more and not be so vertical because we're just getting killed every game, he just wants to stick with the same system. He thinks that this is the only way we can play. He shit himself so much in the first 2 games when we got twatted by Brentford and Brighton. It's just haunted him ever since. And only when Bruno and Rashford and this and that and this player's out and this player's out, and Casemiro drops into centre back and all this, only then do we see, oh right, a little bit of change and flexibility. And what happens? We keep the ball and we don't look stupid against one of the best teams in Europe, right? Let's have it right. Now, of course, Arsenal wanted to give us a ball. They were in a low block, but we kept the ball. The reason why Arsenal came out of that low block after 15, 20 minutes was because they were like, oh, United are actually just keeping us here and they're not really giving us many counter-attacking opportunities. And because we kept the ball and Ahmad was dropping in a little bit deeper to get on the ball more and coming in centrally more, coming way off the wing at times, because we're keeping the ball a bit more, we could actually get our inverted fullbacks into the right correct positions and get McTominay into the right positions. So then when the ball did get turned over, we would then be able to recycle the ball and actually all be in better positions. So because of player profiles not being available, we actually looked better in a sense. There was better elements of that game. Now people say, oh, we didn't. Now this isn't a Man United. I'm going to do a reaction to the game after. But yeah, the one thing about the game I'll say in this video is people say we didn't create anything, right? No chances were being created. We were getting the ball into the correct positions for Garnacho and Højlund to try and do something. So the ball was getting into the correct areas. We just didn't have the quality in the striker area and on the left hand side where the ball was kind of coming down quite a bit into Garnacho. Like, that's just a lack of quality of those two players. We know that they lack quality. I don't mind that. That's fine, because that's just replacing those players. So all the rest of it was kind of pretty nice or like good enough for now. And it was just the final bit that was letting us down, whereas every part of it has been letting us down, and we've been being told that Bruno and Rashford and all, oh, thank God for our attacking players. Thank God for them. No, they're the problem. Like, those attacking players are the problem. And just play the right players behind them, and things will look a little bit better, like we saw. Rio alluded to, like, we miss Bruno, and we did not miss Bruno in yesterday's game, because Bruno Fernandes, that we would have been done on the counter so many times in the first half if Bruno Fernandes was playing, because the ball would have we would have played the ball quicker and forward way quicker. McTominay wouldn't have been in the good positions that he was in to stop any type of breaks and counters, because Bruno would have been playing there, and he wouldn't have made the midfield so compact. So the ball would have been getting forward quicker, right, and losing the ball quicker. The ball then would have been coming back at us quicker. We would have been out of position, and we wouldn't be compact in midfield, and we'd have been popped off, and we'd be like, oh my God, we are so awful again. Like, that's what would have happened if Bruno would have played, 100%. But because he's such an influential figure, like, that's it. Like, he has good things, he's effective, and he does a lot of good things, or he has done in his time at Man United, right? I don't rate him, but I'm trying to be balanced with it. So he's effective, but also he's massively influential. You're effective and influential, and in this one aspect, it's a negative. It's fine for to talk about a player's negatives. Like, we were more compact in that midfield because Bruno, like, Amrabat's played before, right, and Bruno's played, right? We've seen that, and it still looks disjointed. Bringing Amrabat in and then not having Bruno Fernandes in, now you're talking to a real change in the midfield. And Scott McTominay being more compact and sticking with his midfield a little bit more, and obviously Kobe actually being able to play a bit, and then, like, that keeps the structure more. Like, yeah, anyway, I'll get into the game later on. But yeah, and then I'll just bash through these 2 points quick, because I've been doing 34 minutes. It's not too bad. But yeah, so in terms of the tactical rigidity that I'll put there, that just goes back to these kind of, we kind of mentioned it there in terms of the injury reaction. So his unwillingness to try anything else. Now, surely that's a massive part of it. When this ship is sinking, like, you're trying to, like, what, or when something, like, I don't know, the engines have failed on the airplane, everyone's trying to, like, do stuff in it, like trying to, like, right, this button, like, what can I fix? Like, steering, like, you're trying to fix it, right? You're there, look, things are moving, right? The options are being tried, right? Or you got a load of keys trying to open a door, you're going through the keys. Like Ten Hag, if he's on a plane and it's going down, like, he's just pressing the same button over and over and over again. And it's like, that's not, like, so there's no flexibility or like willingness to try different things. Like, nope, this is what I do. And again, going back to the point I said before, if you're kind of, right, we're sticking to trying to play good football and we're at the beginning of our process or just like a year into it, I know we've got loads of injuries, but this is the way I'm playing, man, and this is the way we play, and it's good. Do you know what I mean? It's good football. We've just got a load of injuries, so at the moment, it's not looking that nice. I just think that, like, when it's Ten Hag style of play and he's doing that, then I'm like, man, it looks horrid, right? So then you're like, right, my style doesn't work. I can't be so stubborn. I can't be so stubborn with my tactics and the way I play, because when I haven't got the players, it looks disgusting. And that's what it does, isn't it? It looks disgusting. So because, like, that's the style you've picked that you want to play, bro. Now, when you don't have your players, every single one, like you say, it looks awful. Now, that in itself's a problem, right? Because it's not a very rigid, it's not a very, like, sturdy system to go off. But if you are going to go by that system with your first team, just understand that it doesn't work when those players aren't there, like you've said. So try other things, like just bring your midfielders in. Like, I've never seen someone just not, like, bother trying anything else. It's very interesting. Especially, like, when you've got such a pragmatic style. And I just think there's just a lot of flaws and a lot of things that he's done wrong, and that I've got nothing to do with structure. Like, you've been given these tools, you've basically bought in a lot of these tools also, and, like, it's not structural based with a lot of these decisions that have been made, and a lot of them are actually, like, pretty problematic. Like, we're going to be completely out of Europe because you don't want to change anything tactically throughout the whole season. You don't want to fill that midfield. You don't want to make us hard to beat. And then, right, we've got injuries. Like, we're going to be boring. It's going to be 0-0 or 1-0 either way for like 2 months. Deal with it, because we're fucked injury-wise. None of these things. He's not interested in those things. And yeah, like, just going back to Rio's point, like, none of these things that we spoke about are necessarily, like, they can be obviously related to structural issues in terms of above him in the hierarchy, but these things, like, the decisions he's made are a lot of them are like managerial decisions. A lot of these things we're talking about are managerial in the moment decisions. His charisma and his press conferences, that's just him, right? It doesn't matter, like, who's owning the club. Your reaction to injuries, that's on you. Like, you might not have the players that you want on the bench, but, like, how are you going to use them? How are you going to utilize them? So we see these things, they're managerial things, like your tactical rigidity. Like, if you don't want to bring your midfielders back in, if you don't want to maybe try and go with, like, whatever, like, playing, like, if you don't want to try different formations or different player profiles that you do have, they might not be, like, the greatest options, or, like, if you don't even want to attempt to try them, like, that's a managerial issue. These are all managerial things. So I feel like saying, oh, he has another structure, I give him the structure, I think it's quite a simplified way of looking at it. And the last thing, it just goes back to all of these things, and there's accountability for these things. And I think the reason why he's got away with things, the one thing he does do in press conferences really well is just deflect and, like, nope, not me. Nope. He's very, like, teenage, kind of, he's got this teenage mentality a little bit. Like, he's seen his arse a bit, doesn't like that he's had any kind of criticism, so he's just kind of seen his arse with it all. And he took no accountability for any of it. He's put it all on injuries, and then, I feel like that coldness that you see from him in press conferences, it's almost like how dare you question the fact that it's anything but injuries. And I feel like that in itself is a lack of awareness, isn't it? And a lot of people that lack accountability in their life, they lack awareness about their life. They lack awareness, and then that's when the delusional elements come in. because there's no accountability for actions or no thought process of accountability. Like, what part of that was on me? Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're not going through life with that kind of like perspective, even on you internally, like, forget everyone else, like internally yourself, you got accountability for yourself and your actions, and especially as a leader, and then even a leader at a bloody Subway, bro, you got accountability. You got to think about it. But let alone at like this blue chip sports brand, man. Come on, and I feel like his leadership style isn't warm, isn't inspiring. And there's cultural elements to that also. I feel like maybe if he's a manager in Germany, then there's no need for it. So isn't as much of a kind of fiery atmosphere as it is in England at times. And also, like, maybe in Italy and Spain, like, you just wouldn't work for him. You can just see that cold nature just doesn't work in these other cultures and climates, right? So I think Ten Hag will struggle to, after this job, to get one of those prestige jobs, right? I don't think, maybe Bayern, but there's no way of Madrid. Obviously, Barca, I can't, Juve, the Milan clubs, like, I don't see it. And I think that accountability is a massive thing for a leader. And when you're looking at one of the biggest institutions on the planet and leading that and being the mouthpiece for this club and being the person that leads and directs this team, I feel like you need so much more, and you need so much more than just to have good, like, football kind of rhetoric and kind of like have this kind of like ego, this nerd ego, the most dangerous ego of all, the nerd ego. But I don't even, that's kind of disrespecting nerds. I don't even think that Ten Hag's like a nerd like that. Like like I'll kind of put that on him because he's just that bold, kind of like awkward guy. I just think he's kind of like, he's like a Dutch. This sounds so disrespectful, but in America it's the hillbillies, right? And literally, I don't know if you can tell, but like, I live in the Midlands at the moment, right? And this is the hillbilly area of England, right? No one really goes there. People talk like shit, and people think everyone's dumb from this area, right? It's the same. I think he's from like some more like rural part of the Netherlands, and he just sounds like that kind of like farmer, kind of like Dutch farmy type, kind of like simple dude, man. I feel like there is a delusion to him, and I don't feel like his performance as a manager has been good enough to kind of give that, like, how can any of this be on me? I've done everything right. And I feel like Steve McLaren, he did that performance podcast thing, or he was with his kid. I think his kid had a podcast or something. I don't know. Someone had a podcast, and it was like a sports performance podcast, and he spoke about the FC 20 or 20 or whatever you want to call them. Ten Hag was his assistant, and Ten Hag was just like the plans and the pre-seasons and all this detail that was just like, oh, he was just like, he did so much, and like we turned to him for this and that. And I feel like Ten Hag he thinks he can kind of like out prepare everyone, not like, do you know what I mean, like out book smart or everyone, or like kind of like out bookworm everyone and outright everyone in terms of this, and like there's no feel. And I feel like as the higher up you get in management, like everyone's tactically astute. Do you know what I mean? It's like in professional football as well. Like you get to a certain level, and it's like everyone's technically good, everyone's physically good. It's like what everyone's quick, everyone. Do you know what I mean? So then it's like, right, what are the differences? And it's about in here, isn't it? And the IQ and how calm you are and all these things, and then they come into play. And I think it's the same with management. The higher up you go, the more the less and less it does become about the like you. you obviously have to be tactically good, but then there's an element of the feel and the charisma and those things come into it, and the way you are and how warm you are and how you deal with this type of person from this culture and this background and these personality traits and these characteristics, and how you deal with him and his family and how you deal with the media and how you deal with this. Like, it becomes way more of a political thing, and I don't think Ten Hag is a good enough politician. There's a lot of other things maybe, but I feel like he hasn't got the characteristics and the flexibility as a human being and as a manager to succeed at one of these blue chip clubs. Daly Maguire in the bag. Yeah. Start doing a lot more of these.